Now that we know how to create React elements, let's see how to create a React component. In this class, we will learn to create our first React component. You can assume React component as a piece of a puzzle. It's a little piece of the UI that we are going to use to describe a part of our application. We already have a component in our project. For now, we'll make use of it. That's the app component which we removed before from the index.js file. You can find the app component in the app.js file over here. We create a component by creating a function. And the function which we create returns some kind of JSX. Basically, it creates a simple UI element, which we can use and return to the DOM. At the bottom of the page, you can see there is a line called export default app. This basically means we have to import it somewhere. In this case, we are going to import this in the index.js file. So we need to type in and get our app imported first. So I'm going to type in import app from app. And you can close this here. Save this. Now you can replace the UL with the app component. So you can just remove this and you can simply call in the app component. Let's save that. Now if you check your browser, you can see that our app is being rendered. Now let's get back to our app.js and let's create some different components. Okay, so here what we need to do now is we need to get back into the app.js file here. Now that we are in the app.js file, the first thing what we are going to do is remove everything that is inside the header. So all of these items here, so I'm just going to get rid of all of these items. Since we have removed the header, we can also remove the logo from the import, which is over here. Now let's create 3 simple headings inside the app component. We're going to call this as h1 and we're going to call this as header. Let's create the second one. I'm going to call this as h2. We'll call this as main. Let's create the third one. Call this as h3. And then we're going to call this as footer. Let's save that. Now let's get back to the browser. Here you can see that we have rendered 3 headings. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use these headings as placeholders for the components which we create. Let's get back to the app.js. Now let's create a header component in the app.js file. Now make sure that when you create the header component, it starts with a capital H. We are going to create this component before the app component. Now call this as function header. And inside that, what we're going to do is we're going to return a JSX expression. So I'm going to call this as header. And inside this, we're going to give a h1 tag, and we're going to call this as Paro's recipes. Let's save that. So now what we need to do is display this header component inside the app component. In order to do that, we just need to replace the h1 tag with the header tag. So I'm going to get rid of this one here, and I'm going to simply call this as header. Let's save that. Now if you check your browser, you can see Pauro's recipes in the header. Now let's right click here and inspect element. And if you check the inspect element here in the inspector, you can see that we have got all the tags that are required. Now let's go ahead and create our main component. Let's get back to our code editor, and right after the header, we're going to say function main, and inside that we're going to return a CSS expression that is going to be a main tag, and inside that we're going to give a p tag, and we're going to write in some text like best recipes for quick and tasty food. Let's save this. Now we need to integrate this in the app component. So we're going to do this just the way we did before. So just going to get rid of this one, and here we can simply call in the main component. Save this. Okay, so the next thing what we need to do is we need to create the footer component. So I'm going to call this as function footer, and inside that we're going to call a return statement which is going to return a CSS expression, which basically is footer. And inside this we're going to give a p tag. I'm going to call this as copyright ampersand copy 2022. Let's save that. Now we need to replace the h3 tag with the footer tag. So I'm going to call this as footer. We're just going to close it here, save that. Let's get back to the browser. As now you can see that we have three different components which are a part of a single app component. In the previous class we saw how we can create components. Now let's see how we can display dynamic data. Let's say I want to change the header name dynamically. So right now it simply says Pauro's recipes. So if I get back to the code here, in the main header you can see that I have a h1. So in order to change this dynamically, we need to work with props. Every React component has access to this props. So let's pass props in the header function. So all you have to do is here just type in props. Save that. The props object will hold all the different properties for our component. Now let's try to console log this in the browser. So right after this, what we're going to do is, that is before the return statement here, what we're going to do is we're going to type in console.log, and inside this we're going to call props. Let's save that. Let's get to the browser and go to console. So here you can see right now the props shows a empty object. There's nothing inside this. So now we can add values to this component. We need to add this into the place where it is going to be rendered. For example, the component is inside the app component. Let's get back to our code here. You can see that the header which we created is inside the app component. So we need to add it over there. So what we need to do now is to add some attributes to the header tag inside the app component. For example, I'm going to give a name attribute, and I'm going to assign that with some values. I'm going to call this as my recipes. Let's save that. Now let's go back to the CSS expression which we created over here. And instead of writing Pauro's recipes, I'm just going to replace this with curly braces and type in props dot name. Save that. Now if you go to the browser and let's refresh this, in the console log you can see that we have an object. Now you can try changing the header tag name attribute to anything you want. Now let's try adding property to our main component. Let's get back to our code and let's reach to the main component. And this has been loaded from the main component over here. Right now our main component text says best recipes for quick and tasty food. Let's try replacing the text with delicious. So the first thing we have to do is in the app component we need to create an adjective. Let's get down over here, and in the main component here we're going to give an adjective. I'm going to call this delicious. Let's save that. Now in the main component we need to add props. Let's save that. Now here instead of tasty we're just going to remove this and add curly braces, and we're going to say props dot adjective. Let's save that. Let's get to the browser, and you can see that tasty is been now replaced with the delicious. Okay, now the only thing left for us to do is to work with the footer. Here in the browser you can see that we have a copyright logo that is over here. What I want to do here is I want to show the current year. Let's try that. Let's get back to our code. Now let's get back to the app component here, and inside that we have footer. So we're going to type in year is equals to, I'm going to say new date, and that's a function here, and then we're going to get full year. Let's save that. Now let's get to the footer function over here, and let's add some props. I'm going to call this as props. Save that. And instead of this 2022, what I can do is I can get rid of this one, and here we can say props dot year, and let's save that. So if you get back to your browser here and just hit refresh, you can see that we have 2022 listed, which is the current year. In the last class we saw how we can pass properties to the component in few different ways. We use strings and date function, but what if we have like a lot more data? For example, let's say we will create a simple constant with a list of arrays. So we're going to do that right before the app component over here. I'm going to call this as const, and we're going to name this as recipes. And inside that I'm going to add in a list of array items. I'm going to call this as breakfast recipe. Okay, and then we're going to duplicate that. I'm going to call this as brunch recipes. Then we have lunch recipes. Then let's say we have this dinner recipes. Now let's try to, in order to display these data in the main component, what we need to do is we need to first map over it. So we're going to call this as recipes dot map, and inside that we're going to call like recipes, actually it's a single one, recipe, and we're going to try to console log this first. So I'm going to say console dot log, and then we'll output recipe here. Let's save this and let's check it in our browser first. So I'm going to hit refresh, right click and inspect. Let's go to console. So here you can see that our list is displayed. Now we need to make this data available to the component. First, let's add the property to the main component or the main tag, which is inside the app component. Let's get back here, and what we're going to do is we're going to call this as recipes, and inside that I'm going to give curly braces. I'm going to call this as recipes. Notice we are using curly braces here because what we are doing is to display a variable. So now what you can do is you can cut this entire thing, and then we can put it inside the main component here, which is with the help of JSX. What we're going to do is we're going to simply add in a UL tag, and we're going to add this curly braces here and just paste it. We don't need this closing tag there. Since we are using props, what we can do is we can simply call this as props, and we can display those items. When I get rid of this console.log, and instead what we can do is we can give in a li tag, and inside that we can specify the single recipe. Save that. Let's get back to our browser here and hit refresh. I'm going to close this console log for now, and here you can see that we have all the recipes listed. Great, everything looks good, but if you remember, like if you open this inspect element here in the console, we did see an error. So the error is like each child in a list should have a unique key prop. We will see how to fix this in the next class. In the previous class, we saw how we can render a list dynamically. So if we want to add another item in our list, we can add it and it will reflect dynamically. But one issue we faced was the error in the console about the key. Here you can see there is a link in the error. When we click on this, it kind of takes us to the particular error documentation. So basically, a key is like an ID of a particular item which keeps things in order. So what we can do here is we can add a variable which will store the ID. For example, let's get back to our code. We can simply give a comma here and say recipe underscore ID, and then in the li we can give an attribute called as key and then set it to recipe ID. Let's save that, and if I get back to the browser and hit refresh, there, our error is gone. But this method is against the React documentation. Instead, what we want to do is we can just adjust the array to return the objects instead of strings. So instead of rewriting the entire list, we can transform it. Let's get back to our code here. And right after this recipe here, what we can do is we can create a const, say recipe objects, and we can say recipes dot map, and inside that we can say recipe, then we can give this as recipe ID, and then we're going to call a function here. Inside that we can give in the IDs, like ID is going to be recipe ID, and then we can specify the title as recipe. Let's save that. And now after this, what we can do is we can try console logging it. So we can say console.log, and inside this we can simply specify recipe objects. Let's save this. Let's get back to the browser here and let's click on refresh. So here you can see that we have an array with 4 items in it, and we have each and everything, like each and every object has an ID here. So now here you can see that we have a list created in an object form with its ID and title also. Now let's remove the console.log. Let's get back here. I'm going to get rid of this thing. Let's save that. Now in the app component, which is over here, instead of passing the array of strings, we can pass the object itself. So in the main component here we have recipes, right? So what we can do is we can get rid of this and we can simply call this as recipe objects. Save that. Okay, now we need to update the main component too. So we can go back to the main component, which is over here, and we can get rid of this recipe ID here. Save that. And in the key, we have recipe underscore ID, and instead of this we can simply specify recipe dot ID. Let's save that. And here we can simply say recipe dot title. Let's save that. Okay, let's get to the browser and let's hit refresh. Now you can see that everything's working fine. We have our objects too, but it's kind of showing the console.log here. So let's see where is that coming from. So yeah, this is the one. So I'm going to get rid of this one too. Okay, so let's save this. Let's get back to the browser and hit refresh. So we have the list of recipes showing up with the keys and without any errors. In the previous classes, we saw how to add text to our React app. In this class, we will learn how to add images to our React application. We can add images to our React just like using HTML. First, we need to decide where we want to place the image. So in my case, I'm going to place the image inside the main component, which is after this paragraph tag here. First, we will create a folder in the src folder, call it as images. So all we have to do is here, create a folder called images. Then save the image of your choice in the image folder. To get that, what we can do is we can go to pixabay.com and we'll type in recipes. See what do we get. Okay, I'm going to use this image. So just click on this one, right click, save image as, desktop. So we have src images. I'm going to call this as, okay, that's in WebP format. Okay, I'm going to use this image. So I'm going to click on download and I'm going to choose the small version here and click on weave. Okay, save image as, desktop, my project, src images. I'm going to call this as recipe image. Actually, I have to be very specific when naming the images. I'm going to call this as pizza. Save that. Okay, so that is saved. Let's get back to our code here. Now in the top, we need to import that image. So what we can do is we can type in import. I'm going to call this as img underscore recipe. And we want to import that from, and here we can say that it is an images folder, and inside the images folder, okay, what did I name that? Yes, its name is recipe underscore images underscore pizza .jpg, and let's close that. Save this. Now that we have imported it, let's try placing it in the main component. I'm going to place it over here. So I'm going to give it a tab, give another one, and here we can simply say img, and I don't need a closing tag for this, I just need a single one. And inside this, what I need is src, and we're going to give the curly braces and the name. So that is img recipe. Okay, let's save this. Now let's get back to the browser, to our app. Here you can see that our image is showing up. Now this kind of looks pretty big, so you can write styles for this. So what we can do is we can get back to our code, and this is our image. So what we can do is we can specify the height for now. I will give the height, and I'm going to set it to 200. Save that. Let's get back to the browser. Yeah, I think that looks good. You can also load a URL. For example, you can load your profile picture from the GitHub. So what we can do is I'm going to close this one. I'm going to go to github.com. Okay, so my username here is Prime Inspire. Okay, so this is the one. So all I have to do is just get this image. So if I just type in .png, okay, so that's my image. So all I have to do is just get that PNG thing. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to get back to my code. And inside this, we have this recipe thing, right? So just going to get rid of this one and give a string, and I'm going to paste it. .png. Let's save this. So if I get to the browser, so here you can see that I have my GitHub logo showing up. Okay, so this is one way how you can, like, these are two ways. So one is by importing the image and the other one with the URL. So I'm going to get back to the imported image here. So what we can do is we can get back to our code. I can get rid of this thing, and I can simply say img recipe. I'll save that. When you're working with images for web, you have to make sure that alt attribute has to be provided for every image. Alt attributes is like a specific name for that image if the image does not display. Here, another thing is that image alt attributes have to be very descriptive. For example, in our image, we can use the alt tag as, so I'm going to call this as alt. Okay, I'm going to call this as pizza sliced. Okay, so that's pretty precise, I guess, for our image. That's it. So let's get back to our browser. You can see that we have this. I'm going to inspect this, and here you can see that we have image which is loaded dynamically through the React, and we have the alt attribute also showing up. That's a sliced pizza over here. For now, let's go to the index.js. Here you can see that the app component is rendered with the React DOM.render. Let's render another additional component above the React DOM.render. Let's call this component as app2. So what we're going to do is here, I'm going to call this as function app2. And then we're going to return a h1 tag. So here you can see that all we are doing is just adding a h1 saying this is a second app. Let's try rendering them in the root div. So all I have to do here is just give another one. I'm going to call this as app2. When you do this and you check your browser, you can see that there is an error. So we need to fix this. In order to fix this, what we all have to do is we need to wrap this inside a div. Let's save this. Let's get back to the browser. Now you can see we don't have any kind of issues now. If we close this, here you can see that it now renders as this is a second app. And in our code, you can also see this here. This will fix the issue, but the problem is that in my future projects, I have to use a parent div all the time. One way to fix this is by using React fragment. For example, let's wrap the app component and app2 in the React fragment. So instead of specifying div, all I have to do here is call a React fragment. I'm going to take this one, cut this, and paste it over here. Save that. In this way, there is no parent tag required. Let's check the browser. Let's refresh this. Let's right click and inspect. Now, if you go to the inspector, you can see there are no parent dev tag required, and both app and app2 are showing as siblings. So this is the app1 and this is the app2 which you created, and they both are right now showing as siblings. There is another shorter way of doing this. All you have to do is just add a blank tag. So let's get back to our code, and here instead of this, you can remove this and simply specify some blank tags. Save this. This will do the same thing. Also, let's get back to the app.js here. And let's say that I want to specify a class here. So instead of simply giving it as class, we'll be specifying them as class name. So in HTML, you'll be specifying it as just class, but in React, you need to specify that as class name. And I can call this as header styles. And then you can write your own CSS to this. This is how you're supposed to specify class names in React.